Shankar Bhagwan ki. Yay. Thank you everyone. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
You can speak now. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Okay, so we done lovely Shiv Puja earlier, and now we're here with a wonderful guest. This lovely lady has been part of a great amount of Hindu conversations. Her father has been monumental in speaking about Hinduism on a practical sense, as well as being on the BBC, being published all over the world about the importance of Hinduism, teaching everyone about the importance of Hinduism. And so we are so fortunate to have this wonderful lady here to represent her father, who has gained all his beautiful and wonderful knowledge that she's willing to share with us all today. And we should all feel very honoured and very blessed to have her in our presence. So without further ado, if you could all give a big round of applause.
Thank you so much, and it's so lovely to meet all of you. I thought I'd start talking today with a thought experiment. Imagine there's a very fast, powerful train moving down a train track. And imagine also a little earthworm on the train track. And the earthworm spots the train just about in time, and it wriggles out of the way just about in time before the fast-moving train comes along. Which is more powerful? You might think, oh, surely the train is more powerful. Look how big and strong it is. And look at this little earthworm, this tiny little earthworm. And the slightest touch of a fast-moving train would be enough to end its life. But actually, we would say that the worm is greater than the train, because the worm is living and the train is non-living. So what is the difference then between the living and the non-living? The non-living mechanically performs whatever actions it's been programmed to do. And the living, it may be programmed in a certain way, but it will do anything in its power to defy the rules that it's been sort of confined to. It will do anything in its power to try and break free from all the rules and regulations. And that is the difference then between the living and the non-living. The living is always striving for freedom. Perhaps it's not a coincidence then that the first utterance of a newborn baby is a cry against the rules in which it finds itself confined. And it really feels like freedom is the song of the singer, but actually we seem to be sort of bound and confined by nature, and that seems to be our fate. And as we grow up, we try and search for this freedom in the world around us. And we look to the material world and we try and set certain goals. We say, oh, when I grow up, I want to be able to earn a lot of money and have a nice big house and a nice big car. And if I have those things, I will feel free. But actually what you find is when you do sort of hit those goals, if you're lucky enough to hit those goals, you find that actually you're hit with a kind of dissatisfaction. And what you find is that sometimes you end up in more problems and more worries than you had started off with. So rather than feeling free, you feel anything but free. And you keep searching in the material world to try and find a solution. How can I achieve freedom? And eventually that maturity will arise within us where we realize that, hang on, I'm not able to find the freedom that I'm craving for in the material world around me. Where else can I turn to? And that is perhaps when you develop a more sort of spiritual outlook in your life. And you might start to think, oh, I love this idea of freedom so much. How can I achieve it? And one of the ways that people try and achieve it is they say, let me try and personify this idea of freedom. Let me turn this idea of freedom, which I love, into a person. And let me call that person a God. And let me pray to that God. And pray to him that he can grant me the same freedom that he has. I want to also become a master of nature. I don't want to be tied down to all the rules of nature. Let me try and find that freedom in this way. Some people say, that doesn't suit me, and that's totally fine. And they say, how can I achieve freedom? The way I can achieve freedom is by becoming a master of nature. How do I develop mastery of nature, by gaining knowledge. So the more knowledge I have, the more freedom, the more mastery I have over nature, and the more freedom that I have. And actually what you find is that endeavours like science are actually a striving for knowledge, and therefore are also a striving for freedom. So these are positive ways that we can try and search for freedom. But some people actually go in a more sort of negative way. And they say, for example, if you look at a robber, why does the robber rob? Because they want to be free from the idea that they are lacking in something. Why does a drug addict take drugs? Because they want to be free from the pain and suffering and the worries that their life has brought to them. So actually you can see the good, the bad, the ugly, all of us are all striving for the same one thing, this freedom. And why do we all have this same goal? Well, we turn to Hindu philosophy, and what Hindu philosophy tells us is that the reason why we all have this same striving for freedom is because we are all the manifestation of the same one spirit. And there's a beautiful analogy to help us understand that. Suppose you imagine that all of us have a light within us, and the way that we can express our freedom is by letting that light shine as brightly as we can. But the problem is when we're living our sort of muddy materialistic life, that light within us gets covered by so many veils. And the way that we can achieve freedom is by trying to uncover those veils through knowledge or praying to a god or whatever positive way that we can to achieve that freedom. But some people go in a more negative way, and rather than sort of uncovering those veils, they are adding more veils to the light. And you look at the most sort of despicable person that you can imagine, and you're like, oh, how can this person have any light, any spirit within them? They've done such awful things in their life. I can't see any light within them. But actually Hindu philosophy would say, yes, of course, there is a light within them. The only problem is that light is obscured, that light is covered by so many veils. And that individual has got a lot of hard work to do in order to start uncovering those veils again. Once upon a time, in ancient times, there lived a little boy called Nachiketa. And his father was a very wealthy king. And in those ancient times, it was believed that if you performed a certain sacrifice, a certain yagna, where you gave away the best of everything that you owned, you could achieve freedom. And Nachiketa's father wanted to perform this sacrifice. And Nachiketa sat down to watch his father performing this sacrifice. But he was disappointed by what he saw, because he saw that instead of giving away the best of everything that he owned, he was in a way trying to cheat the system. Instead of giving away the best cows that he owned, he gave away the sickest cows that he owned. Instead of giving away the finest clothes that he owned, he gave away second-hand, worn-out clothes. And Nachiketa was disappointed to see his father behaving in this way. So he went up to him and confronted him and said, "Father, how can you ever expect to achieve freedom in this way? You are not giving away the best of everything that you own. Look at me, I am your son. I'm one of the best things that you possess. So who are you going to give me away to?" And his father was obviously very angry at being confronted in this way. And he said, "Fine, you want me to give you away? I'll give you away to the god of death." And obviously, Nachiketa's father didn't actually mean that. He just said it in a moment of anger. But little Nachiketa took it literally. And off he went to the home of the god of death. And he went to the gates of the god of death, and he saw that he wasn't home. Even the gods are busy, and they're not always at home. So Nachiketa sat down by the gates of the god of death and patiently waited for 3 days and 3 nights. And he was tired and hungry and thirsty, but his eyes were shining bright with determination. Eventually, the god of death arrived home, and he was very surprised to see this little boy waiting for him. And he said to him, "Who are you, little boy? Most people run away from me. I'm the god of death, and here you are sitting fearlessly waiting for me. I'm very pleased with you. I will grant you any wish that you desire." And Nachiketa says, "Yes, there is something that I wish for. I can see that my father on earth, he is not ready for freedom. He is still attached to his material possessions. So please, I wish that you can grant my father all the material comforts he needs to live out the rest of his life well on earth. And the God of death said, easy, I can do that, no problem. Is there anything else that you wish for? Nachiketa said, now this is the crunch time. Nachiketa said, yes, there is something that I desire. I desire to know how I can achieve freedom. I desire to know who I truly am. I desire the knowledge that can help me become immortal and escape death. And the God of death was really taken aback. He said, who is this little boy? First of all, here he is, waiting for me patiently. Now he's asking the most pointed questions. And he said to the little boy Nachiketa, please, don't ask me this question. No one has ever dared to ask me this question. Please, you know what? Instead of that, I will give you chariots of gold. I will give you beautiful palaces. I will make you the most powerful king on earth. But I beg of you, please, don't ask me this question. And Nachiketa's response is very powerful. He said, keep your chariots of gold, keep your palaces, because they belong to the material world and they will never last forever. I desire the knowledge which does last forever. And eventually the God of death gave in. And thus follows a beautiful dialogue between Nachiketa and the God of death. There's just one thing that I would like to pick out from that dialogue, which I think could really, it's a very practical use and something that can help us in our lives. The God of death told Nachiketa, two things present themselves to humanity. One of them is called the path of Prayas, and one of them is called the path of Shreyas. The path of Prayas is the path of ease and convenience, the path which looks very sweet and very attractive, but which ultimately doesn't yield to any long-term benefit. And the second is the path of Shreyas, and this is the path which looks very difficult and hard and not attractive at all. It looks very bitter to start with, but that is the path which ultimately leads to long-term beneficial results. And we can see in our lives that we are faced with choices all of the time. Say, for example, you've got a big exam tomorrow morning, and then tonight there happens to be a big football match on. Which path do you choose? Do you choose the path of Prayas, the path of ease and convenience, the path where you say, forget about my revision, let me just go and watch the match? But obviously you know that's not going to lead to any long-term beneficial results for you. Or do you restrain yourself and say, I will choose the path of Shreyas, I will restrain from watching the match, but I will go upstairs and revise and do better in my exams as a result. And that's obviously a more beneficial path. But this is just a small example, but as you grow up, you're going to be faced with more and more difficult life decisions. And if you're able to break it down into the path of Prayas versus the path of Shreyas, it can hopefully help you to make better long-term life decisions. The problem is humanity and all of us, we find this a struggle because it's very easy for us to choose the path of ease and pleasure and convenience over the harder and more difficult path. But the problem is, if we spend our entire lives running after ease and pleasure and convenience and running away from the hardships of life, how can we ever expect to achieve freedom if we are spending our entire lives running? There's a beautiful story. Once upon a time, Swami Vivekananda was walking down a narrow alleyway. And in this narrow alleyway was a group of monkeys. And this group of monkeys, when they are in a group like that, they can become quite aggressive. And these monkeys got it in their head that they wanted to follow behind Swami Vivekananda as he was walking down this alleyway. And they started grabbing at his clothes and his feet. And obviously this made Swami Vivekananda very uncomfortable. So he quickened his pace. But the monkeys also quickened their pace and they kept grabbing at his clothes and his feet. And Swami Vivekananda was even more uncomfortable by this, so he started to run. And the monkeys also began to run after him. Eventually a passerby saw what was happening and he shouted across to Swami Vivekananda, "Stop running, just turn around and face the brutes." And Swami Vivekananda immediately stopped running. He turned round and he faced the monkeys. The monkeys got startled by this and they quietly disappeared away back down the alley. And that's actually a really important life lesson for all of us. We spend our lives running away from hardships and difficulties, but if we can have the strength of character, the strength within us to say, let me stop running, let me just turn around and face the hardships and difficulties of life, you will soon find that they will no longer appear as scary and as frightening as you thought that they once were. And it gives you the strength within you to say, you know what, universe, throw me what you've got, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever is out there, I will roll up my sleeves and tackle it. And it will give you tremendous strength of character within you. Because the truth of the matter is, pleasure and ease and convenience is something that never lasts. But we also have to remember that the hardships and difficulties of life also never last as well. It's like what the Buddha says, this too shall pass. And the only thing that is permanent, the only thing that is eternal, is this freedom that we are all striving for. Two birds, best of friends, were sitting on a tree. One of those birds sat on the top branch. The second bird sat on the bottom branch. The bird on the top branch was calm and majestic and still. But the bird on the second branch was a bit more curious. He wanted to explore this new branch that he found himself on. And it was full of lots of different kinds of berries. So the bird on the bottom branch tasted the first berry, and it was very sweet. And he started jumping around for joy. Oh, what a sweet experience. Then he tried another berry, and this berry was a bitter berry, and he spat it out in disgust. He said, oh, what a bitter experience. And again, he tried another sweet berry. And he kept going on like this, but he kept looking up at his friend on the top branch, who was just still and not moving. And he thought, what's wrong with him? Why doesn't he want to enjoy all these lovely berries on this branch? And he carried on in this way, going through sweet experiences and bitter experiences. But eventually, curiosity got the better of the bird on the bottom branch. He came closer to the bird on the top branch, and rays of light shone on him. He came even closer to the bird on the top branch, and he found himself enveloped in light and transformed into the bird on the top branch. And he realised for the first time in his life, this is who I've always been this whole entire time. I thought I was the bird on the bottom branch going through sweet experiences and bitter experiences, but now I finally realised I was never there in the first place. The bird, which looked like a bird on the second branch, was a shadow moving around in the wind, making it look like I was down there. But I never was down there. I have and always have been the bird on the top branch. I'll just end with a classic example of dads. One day, imagine you're going to the seaside on a sunny day, and you look at the sky and you see the beautiful, bright, blazing sun. And then you look down at the surface of the water and you see lots and lots of waves on the surface of the ocean. They're appearing and disappearing and mingling and intermingling with each other. And on the crest of every wave, you see a little sun sparkling. And you might think, oh, are there millions of little suns on the surface of the water appearing and disappearing? But of course, we all know that there are not a million little suns on the surface of the water. We all know that they are a reflection of that brilliant, beautiful sun in the sky. And so it is with us in our entire life experience. We all think there are millions and billions of us living things all sort of mingling and intermingling with each other. But that moment of freedom comes when we realise we were never even here in the first place. We were and always have been that beautiful, brilliant, blazing sun, that beautiful, brilliant spirit. And that is when we realise for the first time that this is my moment of freedom. This is the thing that is eternal and beautiful. It's no longer some kind of poetry that you read in a book. It's something that you can experience for yourself. That this world that we all think we are so caught up in, with all of these sweet experiences and bitter experiences, is so real. But actually it's a world of appearance. We were never even here in the first place. And it makes us wonder, if we think this world of appearance is so beautiful, then just imagine the beauty of the reality behind it. Thank you.
Thursday, I just want to say Massive thank you. That was so enlightening. All the stories and references you gave were, I think, it fit really well into what we on the journey that we're on, and we're trying to learn about our Atma. And I guess one question I had was, you talked about a really beautiful example of the two birds. How, in your knowledge and experience, what is the best way to kind of realize that reality, and kind of see it in
Sure.
yeah.
Thank you. That's a really beautiful question for sure. And it's one of those things because all of us have a very different starting point on our spiritual journey. We've all got very different temperaments, different characters, things we like and dislike. So that's the very empowering thing about Hinduism. It doesn't give us just one set prescription of how to make spiritual progress. There are so many different ways of making spiritual progress. So there is obviously the traditional way where, for example, you love a particular god, a particular deity, and you want to focus all your love and devotion onto that deity. That's a wonderful way of making spiritual progress. But Hinduism is incredibly pluralistic, Dad's words, because that doesn't necessarily fit the mold for everybody. For some people, like we were saying, perhaps it's the striving for knowledge, perhaps science could be your way of making spiritual progress. And as some of you may know, Dad's life's passion was trying to find the links between science and spirituality, because what you find at the level of quantum is that the universe is not made of little pieces of material, it's actually got a non-material foundation. So incredibly, when you're striving for knowledge, you'll eventually hit this field of spirituality, this metaphysical dimension that the world of physics and science is currently not prepared to accept, but will have to accept at one point in the future in order to sort of take that leap into the metaphysical. But yes, so this is the wonderful thing. We've got the path of devotion, we've got the path of knowledge, the path of selfless action, the path where you want to do good for anybody and everybody around you. And that's a really beautiful way, because that's rubbing away at your sense of pride and ego to say, it's not all about me. I have to understand that there is spirit in everyone around me. And that's the way that you can sort of rub away that sense of pride and ego. So we've got these beautiful paths which are obviously talked about in the Bhagavad Gita. So you have to find the path that's right for you.
Any more questions? I have a question. I really liked your story about Vivekananda. About how he was running away from the monkeys. It's just funny. I think some kids have stories about running away from monkeys. But I also, and then you followed that up really nicely with a quote from Buddha about how both good things and bad things will pass. I think my question to you is essentially, how do you overcome this and have that mentality to look further and see, when you're in that state of mind of being in a down state, whatever it may be, how do you look past it and look objectively and be like, oh well, this will just pass? How?
Yeah, no, that's a really beautiful question. The Bhagavad Gita talks about being sthita-prajna, which means being of steady mind. So whenever we're going through the various sort of ups and downs of life, we have to remember, even though we're going through the most happiest moment that we can ever have imagined, remember to temper it and say, this too shall pass. It's not going to last forever. And also similarly with the difficult patches which are inevitable in all of our lives, remember, we will come out of it. We'll come out of it stronger. So I think that the key is to remember that actually we think that we are all here going through all of these various ups and downs of life. But remember that strength within you. That's the thing that will give you the strength, is to remember that you are divine, you are the spirit, and you can get through anything if you put your mind to it.
Hi Krishna. At the first part of your speech, you talked about, the earthworm and then the really fast train, and then you kind of talked about like striving for freedom. How would you like describe like you're kind of free? Like how would you like describe? How would you know like if you have freedom?
That's a beautiful question. I think the truth of the matter is that we are, in fact, in this current moment, we are all free, but we are kind of, our light within us, in a way, is covered by all these veils which make us think that we are not free. We feel that we are bound down by all the rules of nature and all, I have to get up, I have to do this, I have to do this, and you feel like you're bound constantly. But the truth of the matter is that we are not bound. Like the birds on the tree, we think we are here going through all of these various life experiences, but when you achieve that moment of freedom, it's not something that you're like, oh, am I there yet or not? It will blow your socks off. That moment of freedom is absolutely incredible. That moment where you're like, I no longer care about all of these material things anymore. I feel free. And that's the most beautiful experience. And that's what in Hinduism we call moksha. Achieving enlightenment, achieving freedom. Once you know it, and you don't need verification from anybody, you will know it from within you.
Hare Krishna Sita ji. Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It was lovely to hear. One of the questions I had was about the story of Nachiketa. So obviously towards the end, he asked for the materiality for his father, and for himself he asked for spirituality. And of course, in the Gita it says that's like 1 in a million. So for the rest of us trying as hard as we can, how can we stay grounded and keep achieving our material goals whilst also striving for our spiritual goals as well?
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful question. It's a real sort of challenge for all of us, because obviously all of us have material needs. We need to have a job, we need to pay our mortgage, we need to pay our bills, we've got all these material needs. And then how do we sort of, it feels like a contradiction in terms to then have a spiritual outlook in life. But actually what we find is that within the realms of this sort of very material life, if you can have that sort of spiritual outlook within you, and sometimes it's one of those things that you can't have, like somebody wagging their finger at you saying, be spiritual. It has to come naturally from within you. Because in a way, you have to go through the whole process of saying, let me live the best materialistic life that I can. Let me go out and get the top job in the top bank. Let me go out there and become a millionaire or billionaire or whatever I want. Let me go out and do it. And Hinduism would say, you know what, if that's what's aching within you, go out there and do it. Because you need to go through that life experience to say, actually, when you come out of it, you're like, I still feel I've got so many problems. Even though I'm a millionaire or a billionaire, I've ended up with more problems than I started off with. And that's when that maturity will arise within you to say, you know what, I've had enough of this. And the classic example that Dad often uses is, when you go on a merry-go-round, for the first, couple of rounds or whatever, it's so fun, and you're like, wow, this is so brilliant, I don't want to ever get off this. Why would anyone want to ever get off this? But then suppose you keep going round and round and round and round, eventually you're going to start thinking like, this isn't quite as fun as it used to be. And then that pleasure that you can kind of squeezing the juice out of life, it will suddenly start to fade, and there's no more juice left, there's no more enjoyment left. And that is when that stirring, that spiritual stirring will come from within you. And then you'll make those various life choices and life decisions that will help you to take a more spiritual approach to life. Your attitude and your choices that you make will become more and more spiritual. So it's something that you have to sort of grow through. You have to go through the whole process yourself. Because in a way, if you try and bottle up your desires, it's actually a very, very negative thing for yourself, because you'll become obsessed with that idea of becoming a millionaire or billionaire or having this top best car or whatever it is that you want. That'll become an obsession for you if you're trying to stifle it. So Hinduism says, you know what, if that's what you want and it's legitimate, you're not stealing it from anybody, go out there and do it and see what happens to you. And then that's when you start sort of changing your attitude in life. That's it. It's Dad. It's Dad. Brilliant. Thank you.
It was just about the end of the story of Nachiketa, and I think you mentioned that Yamraja's answer to Nachiketa's question of how do I get freedom was those two paths that you mentioned. So I guess my question is, what is the how do you know you're okay? I think it's similar to Ria's, but it was kind of like which path. How do you know you're on one path and you are not on the other? If that makes sense.
So how do you know if you're on the path of Prayas or the path of Shreyas?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, I think eventually as you go through life you will develop the life experiences, and if you can start weighing up what is beneficial long term and what is only a short term temporary measure, that's where you sort of start being able to differentiate. In a way you have to go through those life experiences yourself. There's no sort of textbook to say this scenario is going to hit you, so what do you do? It's not like a test. In a way you have to go through life and learn through those experiences, and sometimes you may go the wrong way, and that's okay because that's part of our learning journey. So as we mature on our spiritual journey, on our growth, that's when we start to learn from our mistakes. And the thing is, it's so incredibly tempting to keep choosing the path of pleasure and ease and convenience. It looks so sweet and so attractive. And the God of Death actually says, people who keep choosing that path, they're going to keep being reborn over and over again. They have to go through the jaws of death over and over again. And through that whole process, we start to learn that, hang on, I don't really want this anymore. Great. Thank you.
Free e-learning course in Hinduism. To register, please visit www.hindu-academy.com.
Talks on Hinduism. Sponsored by People Care. Encouraging caring for the elderly in their own homes. For more information, please visit peoplecare.com.